Hello, I'm Jacob from the Ceres Public Library, and today we're making mozzarella, which will almost certainly involve me destroying at least one utensil or possibly appliance in my kitchen. Come on, it'll be fun. Mozzarella cheese was first discovered by a man named Quincy B. Mozzarella in 1864 in what would eventually be known as the cheese mines of southern Italy. Hold on, cheese mines, that doesn't sound right. Just a sec. So that was the wrong script. You can see. Don't ask. So mozzarella really does have origins in southern Italy. It actually dates back to 1st century CE by the Romans, where they made mozzarella-ish cheese involving sheep's milk. But I think the true origin lies in the 3rd century, when certain monks would give out bread and self-made cheese to their area's poorest populations. They would call this matzah, which is based on the Italian mazzare, which means to separate or cut off. Which, if you've ever seen a large piece of mozzarella, it kind of makes sense. However, 1,300 years later, for reasons no one completely understands, water buffalo farming came to Italy, and they switched to using buffalo milk in their mozzarella, as it was creamier, softer, and more flavorful than sheep's milk. So much so that today, at least in Italy, mozzarella made from water buffalo's milk has a legal definition that it can only be made in a very specific part of Italy. Which I suppose makes it good that I'm going to be using cow's milk, because otherwise I would have to name this video making something resembling but legally distinct from mozzarella. Anyway, as I stated earlier, due to my general failure to properly source Italian buffalo, I'm going to be making mozzarella from cow's milk. In general, cow's milk is made of about 87.7% water, 4.9% lactose, aka like sugars and carbohydrates and things, 3.4% fat, 3.3% protein, and 0.7% minerals known as ash for some reason. Mozzarella is made from a mixture of both the fat, lactose, and, well, part of the protein. Now, there are 2 types of protein in milk, casein and whey. Casein makes up about 82% of the protein in milk, with whey making up the remaining 18%. Mozzarella uses the casein, which is going to allow our cheese to bind together and, hypothetically, given the right temperature, achieve its expected stretchiness. Now, ordinarily, our first step in making mozzarella would be to take our milk and bring it to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. But again, anything between 85 and 105 would work just as well. Once that is done, what we would do is let it sit for a couple of hours and let the lactose sugar ferment into lactic acid, using what we would call good bacteria, all kind of collectively known as lactobacillus. This would in turn drop our pH enough so that our cheese could eventually combine together. That is, if our milk had those bacteria in it, but largely speaking, most of the milk we buy in stores is what's called pasteurized, which is basically a fancy way of saying that it's heated to a point that little, if any, of those bacteria actually still exist. This works great for helping milk stay fresh longer, but doesn't really help us making mozzarella. We can bypass all of that using unpasteurized or raw milk. However, this brings us to another hard truth about myself. Not only do I not have access to water buffalo milk, I don't have access to raw cow's milk. So we're gonna have to cheat a little bit. So the reason we need the lactic acid is that it drops the acidity of our milk, which naturally hovers around 6.5 pH, to about 5.2 to 5.4, which is required for our reaction. So we're going to be doing this by using a quicker, albeit vastly less interesting way, by simply using, well, citric acid, which will quickly lower our pH without the usual fermentation. Now, the next reaction is caused by something called rennet? Oh, rennet! Rennet! Okay, got it. Sans temperature, rennet is the second most important part of the process, which does very little to explain just how utterly strange it is. While absolutely imperative in creating literally every type of cheese, it can only really be found in young goats, calves, and lambs. And even then, only when their main diet is almost exclusively milk. Rarer still, it can exclusively be found inside the 4th stomach, which contains an organic substance that contains the enzyme rennin, which separates the solid milk particles from the water in the milk. And that's what allows us to create the curds of our cheese. Anyway, now that we have the hows and whys down, let's actually make some mozzarella. So while rennet comes in liquid and tablet forms, ours is a tablet, which is going to require us to grind it down before adding it to about a quarter cup of water. Next, we're going to take 1.5 teaspoons of citric acid and combine it with half a cup of water and mix until dissolved. Now we are going to pour our milk into a pot over medium heat and then add our citric acid solution, and then wait until it's heated to around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it reaches the correct temperature, we're going to remove it from our heat and stir in our rennet mixture. From there, we're going to mix it using a figure-8 motion for about 30 seconds. From there, we're going to let it set for about 5 to 15 minutes. This is going to allow our milk to settle into what is known as our curd. Once that's done, we should see a firm curd at the top. You can poke it if you need to. You'll be able to tell. And from there, we're going to cut it into something hopefully maybe approximately 3/4 of an inch cube. Next, we're going to gently, and I mean gently, stir our curds. We want them to largely stay connected, otherwise things get complicated. After that, we're going to return our pot to heat and get it to a temperature around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. From there, we're going to remove it from our heat and extract our curds using a slotted spoon. And then we're going to put it into a colander set over a large bowl. While we let our curds drain, we're going to heat our way to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, ideally wearing gloves, we're going to take a piece of our curd and place it into a slotted spoon. From there, we're going to submerge it into our whey for anywhere between 5 to 15 seconds. You pretty much just want to make sure that it's hot enough to be, well, melty. Next, we are going to take it from the spoon, stretch it, knead it, and fold it until it becomes elastic and smooth. From there, we will reheat it before kneading in some salt to add flavor, and eventually forming it into a ball. From there, we're going to repeat it for the rest of our curd, which isn't not a lot. Now I suppose the only thing left to do is to try it. Cheesy.